My daughter-in-law thought she was so clever, taking over my house while I grieved my husband's death. She changed the locks, moved in her family, and claimed squatters' rights. But Richard had left me one final gift that caught everything on. Camera. The last shovel of dirt hit Richard's coffin with a hollow thud that echoed through my chest like a gunshot. 45 years of marriage reduced to this moment of finality under a gray October sky. I stood there in my black dress, clutching the red roses that had been his favorite, watching the cemetery workers finish their solemn task with practiced efficiency that spoke of too many similar farewells. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe and let us know, where are you watching from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The roses trembled in my arthritic hands, their velvet petals already beginning to brown at the edges despite the cool autumn air. Richard had always said I had the most beautiful hands he'd ever seen, even as age had marked them with liver spots and traced blue veins across the skin like a roadmap of our decades together. Now those same hands felt empty, purposeless without his warm palm to hold. My son Michael stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders, offering the comfort that only a child can provide when you've lost your life partner. At 42, he still had his father's strong jawline and gentle brown eyes, though worry lines had appeared around them in recent months. I could feel his genuine grief in the way his body shook slightly, matching my own tremors of loss. But, even in my overwhelming sorrow, I noticed something strange. His wife Sarah kept checking her phone, glancing at the time with barely concealed impatience. Her manicured fingernails tapped against the device's screen with a rhythm that seemed completely out of place among the mourners. When someone is supposed to be mourning their father-in-law, such behavior seems inappropriate. Sarah had always been beautiful in that polished, carefully constructed way that some women master. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, despite the October wind, and her black dress fit her 30-something figure like it had been tailored specifically for funeral attendants. But there was something in her pale blue eyes that day, a calculating quality that made my skin crawl even through my grief-induced fog. "Mom," Michael said softly, his voice thick with genuine sorrow that reminded me of the little boy who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. "We should head back to the house, the reception." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. My throat felt raw from crying, and words seemed inadequate for the magnitude of what I'd lost. The reception. More condolences from people who meant well, but couldn't possibly understand what it felt like to lose the other half of your soul. More casseroles that would sit untouched in my refrigerator because food had lost all taste and meaning. More well-meaning neighbors telling me how Richard was in a better place now, as if heaven could somehow be better than the life we'd built together in our little house on Maple Street. All I wanted was to go home to the quiet house we'd shared for 3 decades, to sit in his favorite recliner and breathe in the lingering scent of his aftershave on the fabric. I wanted to touch his reading glasses on the bedside table and pretend that he'd just stepped out to check the mail. That any moment I'd hear his key in the front door and his cheerful call of, "Evelyn, I'm home!" Sarah stepped forward, her expression shifting to something that looked like concern but felt calculated in a way that made my stomach turn. "Evelyn, you shouldn't be alone tonight. Why don't you stay with us? I've already prepared the guest room." The offer should have been comforting. A daughter-in-law showing care for her grieving mother-in-law should have warmed my heart. Instead, something about her tone made my skin crawl. There was an urgency beneath her words, a pushiness that felt wrong for the solemn occasion. "Thank you, dear, but I need to be home tonight, with Richard's things. You understand?" Her smile flickered for just a moment, like a light bulb about to burn out. In that instant, I caught a glimpse of something else beneath her carefully composed expression. Irritation? Disappointment? Whatever it was disappeared so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Of course," she said, her voice returning to its practiced sweetness. "But promise me you'll call if you need anything. Anything at all." There was something about the way she emphasized anything that made my pulse quicken. But grief has a way of distorting perception, and I dismissed my unease as part of the emotional turmoil that comes with losing your life partner. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Stories like these need to be shared. The drive home was a blur of autumn leaves and sympathetic faces. Our neighbors had lined the street, standing in respectful silence as the funeral procession passed. Mrs. Henderson from next door waved sadly from her front garden, where she'd been tending the chrysanthemums that Richard had helped her plant just last month. The Patels from across the street stood on their porch with their twin daughters, all four of them dressed in black as a sign of respect for the man who had shoveled their driveway every winter for the past 15 years. Michael insisted on staying with me that first night, sleeping on the couch like he had during childhood thunderstorms. He made us both cups of tea with hands that shook almost as much as mine, and we sat in Richard's living room, surrounded by 45 years of shared memories. The walls were covered with photographs documenting our journey together, our wedding day, Michael's birth, family vacations, birthday celebrations, anniversary dinners. Each image felt like a knife to my heart. Sarah had remained oddly absent after we returned from the cemetery, claiming she needed to handle some urgent family matters. She'd kissed Michael goodbye at the door and promised to check on us in the morning, but something about her hasty departure struck me as strange. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Grief has a way of making everything else seem unimportant, and I was drowning in sorrow too deep to question anyone else's behavior. But now looking back, I realized that while I was drowning in sorrow, my daughter-in-law was putting her plan into motion. The second day after the funeral dawned cold and gray, matching my mood perfectly. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around me. Every creak and groan of the old wooden frame sounded different without Richard's gentle snoring beside me. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway that Richard had restored with his own hands 5 years ago. Michael had reluctantly returned to work after I insisted I needed time alone to process everything. He'd lingered in the doorway, his face etched with concern, asking 3 times if I was sure I'd be all right by myself. I assured him I would be fine, that solitude was what I needed to begin the long journey of learning to live without Richard. The house felt impossibly empty without Richard's presence. No morning coffee brewing in the kitchen where he'd always been the first one up, no rustling of newspapers as he read every section from front to back, no humming of old songs while he puttered in the garage with his woodworking projects. Even the house itself seemed to mourn his absence. The heating system didn't run quite as efficiently without his regular maintenance, and I noticed a loose floorboard in the hallway that he would have fixed immediately. I spent the morning going through sympathy cards, each one a reminder of the life I'd lost. The pile seemed endless: cards from neighbors, former colleagues, members of our church, friends from the senior center where we'd volunteered together. Mrs. Henderson from next door had written about Richard's kindness, how he'd always been ready to help with home repairs or yard work without being asked. The Patels from across the street mentioned his helpful nature, describing how he'd taught their daughters to ride bicycles in our driveway. Everyone remembered him as the man who'd shovel driveways in winter and share vegetables from his garden in summer. Reading their words, I realized how many lives Richard had touched with his quiet generosity. He'd never been a man who sought attention or recognition. He simply saw what needed to be done and did it. Whether it was fixing a neighbor's leaky faucet, volunteering at the food bank, or listening patiently to my worries about Michael's marriage troubles, Richard had always given freely of himself. That afternoon, I decided to visit Richard's workshop in the garage. It had been his sanctuary, the place where he went to think and create and solve problems with his hands. He'd spent countless hours there, building birdhouses for our backyard, crafting toys for Michael when he was small, and fixing household items with the patience of a man who understood that good work took time and couldn't be rushed. The garage was exactly as he'd left it, tools hanging in perfect order on the pegboard he'd installed, wood shavings swept into neat piles in the corners, and half-finished projects waiting for hands that would never return to complete them. The space still smelled like sawdust and WD-40, still held the echo of his gentle whistling as he worked on some intricate piece of joinery or delicate repair. I walked slowly around the workshop, touching his tools and remembering his hands that had held them with such skill and care. His favorite chisel still lay on the workbench where he'd been using it just days before he collapsed, working on a jewelry box he'd intended as a surprise for my upcoming birthday. The wood was beautiful bird's-eye maple that he'd been saving for a special project, and seeing it there unfinished made my heart ache with fresh grief. It was there, while touching his tools and remembering the hands that had held them, that I noticed something odd. A small blinking red light in the corner of the workshop, partially hidden behind his tool cabinet. The light pulsed steadily, like a mechanical heartbeat in the quiet space. Richard had been many things: carpenter, gardener, devoted husband, but never a technology enthusiast. He'd been proud of the fact that he could fix anything mechanical with his hands, but computers and electronic devices had always been foreign territory for him. What was an electronic device doing in his sacred space? Curious, I moved the heavy cabinet aside with some difficulty, my arthritic joints protesting the effort. Behind it, I discovered a small digital camera, professionally mounted on a metal bracket and clearly designed for surveillance. The device was more sophisticated than anything Richard had ever owned, with multiple lenses and what appeared to be infrared capability for night vision recording. A note was taped to the back of the camera, written in Richard's careful handwriting, that I knew as well as my own. Evelyn, I pray you never need this, but I've installed cameras throughout the house. The system records everything to a hidden hard drive in my desk. Password is our anniversary date. Trust no one completely, especially family who think they know what's best for you. All my love, Richard. My hands trembled as I read those words, again and again, trying to make sense of what they meant. Richard had suspected something, but suspected what? And from whom? Why would my gentle, trusting husband feel the need to install surveillance equipment in our own home? The Richard I knew had always believed the best of everyone, sometimes to a fault. The date on the note showed it had been written just 3 weeks before his death. What had happened in those final weeks that had made him feel the need to protect me with hidden cameras? Had he noticed something I'd missed? Some behavior or conversation that had triggered his protective instincts? I rushed back into the house, my grief momentarily pushed aside by confusion and growing alarm. In Richard's study, I found his desk exactly as he'd left it, neat, organized, with everything in its proper place. His reading glasses sat folded, beside a half-finished crossword puzzle, and his coffee mug still held the ring stain from his last cup of morning coffee. The computer was an older model, but Richard had always been surprisingly savvy with electronics when he needed to be. He'd taught himself to use email to stay in touch with his army buddies, and he'd even learned to video chat with his brother in Florida. But surveillance cameras? That was far beyond anything I'd ever seen him attempt. The anniversary date, June 15th, 1978, opened the system immediately. What I found there made my blood run cold and my legs weak enough that I had to grip the desk chair for support. Dozens of video files, organized by date, going back nearly 6 months. The titles were cryptic but clear once I understood the pattern. Kitchen conversation, Sarah and Michael. Living room discussion, inheritance. Phone call, Sarah to unknown person. Garage consultation, Sarah and stranger. The folders were meticulously organized, each one containing multiple files that had been carefully labeled and time-stamped. Richard had been watching and recording for months, documenting something that had made him suspicious enough to take these extraordinary measures. With shaking fingers, I clicked on the most recent file, dated just 2 days ago, the day of Richard's funeral. The timestamp showed it had been recorded while I was at the cemetery, saying my final goodbyes to the love of my life. The screen filled with a crystal-clear image of my living room, captured from a camera I never would have noticed, hidden among Richard's books on the tall shelf. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m., approximately the time I would have been standing beside Richard's grave, dropping those red roses onto his coffin. What I saw next nearly stopped my heart and made me grip the desk so hard my knuckles went white. Sarah stood in my living room, but she wasn't alone. A woman I'd never seen before, elderly, well-dressed, and obviously in perfect health despite leaning on an expensive-looking walker, was directing 2 young men who were moving furniture around like they owned the place. The men appeared to be professional movers, wearing matching uniforms and handling my belongings with the efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. "Put Mother's chair by the window," Sarah was saying, her voice crisp with authority I'd never heard her use before. "She likes the morning light for her reading, and move that old woman's photographs to the hall closet. Mother doesn't want to look at someone else's memories while she's trying to recover." Someone else's memories. She was talking about my memories. My photographs with Richard, my family pictures, my entire life history displayed on the mantelpiece and side tables throughout the room. 45 years of marriage reduced to clutter that needed to be hidden away. The elderly woman, apparently Sarah's mother, spoke with the entitlement of someone accustomed to getting her way. Her voice was strong and clear, showing no signs of The illness or frailty that would require urgent medical attention. This room will do nicely, Sarah. Much better than that cramped apartment you've been keeping me in. The light is excellent and there's plenty of space for my furniture. When will you change the locks? Tomorrow morning, Sarah replied without hesitation, her tone as casual as if they were discussing the weather. I've already contacted Peterson's locksmith. They do excellent work and don't ask unnecessary questions. By the time the old woman gets back from wallowing in her grief, this will be our house. She can find somewhere else to live. Old woman. They were talking about me like I was already dead, like I was just an inconvenience to be disposed of. The callousness in Sarah's voice made my stomach turn. This was the woman who had sat at my dinner table for 5 years, who had shared holiday meals and birthday celebrations, who had called me mom and kissed my cheek at family gatherings. I paused the video, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears and feel it pulsing in my temples. This wasn't some sudden decision made in the chaos of funeral arrangements. This was a calculated plan, executed with military precision while I was burying my husband of 45 years. They had been waiting for this moment, planning for Richard's death like vultures circling a dying animal. But the video wasn't finished. I forced myself to continue watching, needing to understand the full scope of their betrayal, even though each word felt like a physical blow. Michael appeared on screen, and for a moment, hope flared in my chest like a candle in the darkness. Surely my son would put a stop to this madness. Surely the boy I'd raised, who had once made me Mother's Day cards decorated with crayon flowers and had cried when his pet goldfish died, would protect his mother from such cruelty. Are you sure about this, Sarah? He asked, but his tone suggested worry about logistics rather than morality. He wasn't questioning whether they should steal my house. He was only concerned about whether they'd get caught. What if she fights us on it? You know how stubborn she can be when she sets her mind to something. Sarah's laugh was cold and calculating, a sound I'd never heard from her before. It chilled me to the bone and made me realize I'd never really known this woman at all. Michael, your mother is 73 years old and just lost her husband. She's emotionally devastated and probably not thinking clearly. By the time she realizes what's happening, we'll have legal residency established. Squatters' rights exist for a reason, and we'll have documentation showing she invited us to stay. But the will. The will leaves everything to her, yes. But that doesn't matter if she's declared mentally incompetent to manage her affairs. Dr. Rodriguez already agreed to evaluate her mental state if we can document concerning behavior. A few carefully chosen incidents, some testimony from concerned family members, and we'll have guardianship established within a month. My blood turned to ice as the full scope of their plan became clear. They weren't just planning to steal my house. They were planning to steal my entire life. Dr. Rodriguez was Sarah's friend from her previous job at the medical office, a man who had never even met me, but was apparently willing to declare me mentally incompetent based on fabricated evidence. This wasn't just theft. It was a comprehensive plan to erase my independence, my dignity, and my right to make decisions about my own life. They intended to have me declared incompetent, take control of my finances, and warehouse me in some substandard care facility while they sold off everything Richard and I had built together. Michael shifted uncomfortably on camera, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized from his childhood when he'd been caught doing something wrong. I don't know, Sarah. This feels wrong. She's my mother and she just lost Dad. Maybe we should give her more time to adjust. What feels wrong? Sarah snapped, her facade of sweetness completely gone now. Is your mother hoarding this big house? When my mother needs proper care. What feels wrong is letting valuable real estate sit empty while we struggle to pay rent on that tiny apartment. Your mother won't live forever, Michael. We're just accelerating the inevitable. Accelerating the inevitable. They were planning my displacement like it was a business transaction, as if my life and feelings were just obstacles to be overcome in their pursuit of my property. But it was Sarah's next words that revealed the true depth of their betrayal, and made me understand why Richard had felt compelled to install these cameras. Besides, she continued, organizing my kitchen utensils like she already owned them, your father was getting suspicious toward the end. He asked too many questions about my mother's illness and our financial situation. He kept wanting to visit her, to see what kind of care she needed. It's better that he died when he did. He would have complicated things considerably. The video ended there, but I sat staring at the blank screen for what felt like hours. Sarah. had just expressed relief that my husband was dead because it made stealing my house easier. The woman I'd welcomed into my family, who had shared holiday dinners at my table and had held my grandbabies in her arms, was actually grateful that Richard couldn't protect me anymore. She had been relieved by his death, while I had been devastated by the loss of my life partner. She had been celebrating the removal of an obstacle to her plans. The knowledge felt like a physical wound, a pain so deep and sharp that I doubled over in my chair and had to fight not to vomit. But Richard had protected me, even from his deathbed, facing his own mortality and knowing he wouldn't be there to defend me. He'd found a way to give me the weapons I'd need to fight back. His love had transcended death itself, reaching across the divide to shield me from those who would harm me. I spent the rest of that evening going through the video files, documenting months of planning that had led to this moment. Each folder revealed another layer of their deception, another conversation that proved the elaborate nature of their scheme. There were conversations about my declining mental state that were complete fabrications. Sarah had apparently been taking notes on every minor slip of memory or moment of confusion, turning normal signs of aging into evidence of incompetence. A forgotten name at the grocery store became severe memory loss. Struggling to hear in a noisy restaurant became cognitive decline. I found discussions about how to handle the old woman when she became a problem. They had contingency plans for every possible reaction I might have to their theft. If I became suspicious, they would increase the medication Dr. Rodriguez prescribed. If I tried to contact a lawyer, they would claim I was paranoid and delusional. If I reached out to friends or neighbors, they would sadly explain that I was not well and needed professional care. There were plans to sell my house and split the proceeds while keeping me isolated in some substandard care facility across town. They had already researched facilities, choosing ones with poor reputations and minimal oversight. They wanted somewhere that would keep me quiet and out of the way while they liquidated my life savings. Every file was a betrayal, but they were also evidence, legal, documented, irrefutable evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and theft. Richard had given me something more valuable than gold. He had given me proof of their crimes and the means to stop them. The next morning arrived with cruel normalcy that felt like mockery. Birds sang in Richard's garden as if the world hadn't fundamentally changed. The newspaper lay on the front step like nothing had happened, its headlines full of distant problems that seemed insignificant compared to the betrayal I'd discovered. But everything had changed, and I was about to discover just how far Sarah's betrayal extended. I dressed carefully that morning, not in the black of mourning, but in the navy blue suit I'd worn to Michael's graduation and to important occasions throughout my life. The suit was well-tailored and professional, making me look like the competent, intelligent woman I'd always been rather than the helpless victim Sarah had painted me as. If today was going to be a battle, I intended to look like someone worthy of victory rather than pity. The locksmith arrived at 9:30 a.m., exactly as Sarah had planned in her recorded conversation. I watched from my bedroom window as a young man, with official-looking credentials and a Peterson's locksmith van, began changing the locks on my front door. My front door. The door Richard and I had painted together just 3 years ago, choosing a cheerful yellow color that reminded us of sunshine. The door that had welcomed friends and family for decades, that had seen countless celebrations and quiet moments of domestic happiness. Watching a stranger change the locks on my own home felt surreal, like watching someone steal pieces of my identity. Each turn of his screwdriver felt like another barrier being erected between me and my own life. I thought about calling out to stop him, but I knew he was just doing his job. The real criminals were the ones who had hired him. At 10:15, a moving truck pulled into my driveway with a rumble that shook the windows of my house. Not a small van for a few personal items, but a full-sized moving truck that suggested permanent relocation rather than temporary assistance. The truck bore the logo of Henderson Moving Company, a local business that Richard had used when we'd helped Michael move into his first apartment years ago. Sarah's temporary solution for her mother's care was looking increasingly permanent, with each passing minute. This wasn't about providing short-term assistance to a sick woman. This was about a complete takeover of my home and my life. I called Michael's number with trembling fingers, hoping against hope that he might have second thoughts about what they were doing. The phone rang once before going straight to voicemail. His recorded voice sounded cheerful and normal, asking me to leave a message and promising to call back soon. But I knew he wouldn't call back. They had already made their choice. I tried Sarah's phone with the same result. The woman who had promised just yesterday to check on me, who had insisted I call if I needed anything at all, was now refusing to take my calls because she knew exactly what I was calling about. By noon, strangers were living in my house. I could see them through the windows as they moved around the rooms that had been my sanctuary for 30 years. Sarah's mother, who looked remarkably healthy for someone requiring urgent medical care, was directing the placement of her furniture in my living room with the energy and authority of someone who felt perfectly at home. The morning photographs with Richard had been removed from the mantelpiece where they'd sat for decades and replaced with pictures of people I'd never met. Our wedding portrait, which had held the place of honor above the fireplace, was nowhere to be seen. 45 years of marriage, erased as if they had never happened. When I tried to use my key to enter my own home, it no longer worked. The lock clicked uselessly, denying me access to everything I owned, everything I'd built with Richard over 4 decades of marriage. I stood on my own front porch, key in hand, feeling like a stranger being shut out of someone else's life. I knocked on my own front door, the absurdity of the situation not lost on me. This was the door I'd walked through thousands of times, carrying groceries and Christmas presents, welcoming guests, and saying goodbye to loved ones. Now I had to knock and wait for permission to enter my own home. Sarah answered, wearing one of my aprons, my favorite one with the strawberry print that Richard had given me for Mother's Day years ago, and displaying a smile so false it looked painted on. She'd also helped herself to my pearl necklace, the one Richard had given me for our 20th anniversary, wearing my jewelry like she already owned it. "Evelyn," she exclaimed with theatrical surprise that wouldn't have fooled a child. "What are you doing here?" "I thought you were staying with friends." "This is my house, Sarah. What are you doing here?" "Well, Mother needed somewhere safe to recover, and your house has so much space. I thought you'd understand, given how family should support each other during difficult times." She gestured vaguely toward the interior of my home as if she were doing me a favor by occupying it. She was using my own grief against me, weaponizing the concept of family support to justify her theft. The woman was truly shameless, standing in my doorway wearing my jewelry and my apron, while explaining why stealing my house was actually an act of kindness. "I never agreed to this," I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. "You weren't in any condition to make decisions yesterday," Sarah replied, her tone shifting from false sweetness to cold practicality. "You were practically incoherent with grief at the funeral, crying and carrying on like that. Michael and I felt it was best to handle the arrangements ourselves, rather than burden you with details." Incoherent with grief. I had cried at my husband's funeral, and she was using that normal human emotion as evidence that I was incompetent to manage my own affairs. "Handle what arrangements? This is my house." "Actually," Sarah's mother appeared behind her, using a walker that seemed more theatrical prop than medical necessity. "Possession is 9/10 of the law, dear. We've established residency here, and we have witnesses to your unstable behavior at the funeral. Several people mentioned how concerned they were about your mental state." Unstable behavior. I had grieved for my husband of 45 years, and they were using that grief as a weapon against me. The elderly woman spoke with the confidence of someone who had done this before, who knew exactly how to manipulate the system to get what she wanted. "I want you out of my house. Now." Sarah's facade finally cracked completely, revealing the cold, calculating person she'd always been beneath the surface. "Or what? You'll call the police? Go ahead. We have documentation that you invited us to stay. We have medical opinions about your mental state. We have legal residency now, and there's nothing you can do about it." She was right about one thing: they had planned this meticulously, covering every angle and preparing for every contingency. But they had made one crucial error. They had underestimated the man they thought was safely buried and out of their way. Shao. "See?" I said calmly, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my chest. "Well, I suppose I'll need to make some phone calls." "You do that," Sarah said, already closing the door in my face. "But you should know that Dr. Rodriguez is expecting your call. He's very concerned about your recent behavior and thinks you might benefit from professional evaluation. He's cleared his schedule for this afternoon if you'd like to discuss your situation." The door closed with a final click, leaving me standing on my own front porch, locked out of my own life while strangers rearranged my furniture and erased my history. But Richard's gift was still waiting for me, and I had evidence that would destroy their carefully laid plans. I drove to the local police station with a manila folder full of printed screenshots and video files sitting on the passenger seat beside me. The folder was thick with documentation, each page representing another piece of evidence that would prove their guilt beyond any doubt. The desk sergeant, a kind-faced woman named Officer Martinez with graying hair and compassionate eyes, listened to my story with growing amazement. She took notes as I spoke, asking clarifying questions and treating my complaints with the seriousness they deserved. "Mrs. Chen," she said when I finished, "what you're describing is elaborate fraud. If you have video evidence of them planning this while you were at your husband's funeral?" "I have 6 months of evidence," I corrected, opening the folder to show her the documentation. "My husband installed surveillance cameras before he died. Everything is documented, their planning, their motives, their methods. It's all here." Officer Martinez called in Detective Thompson, a sharp-eyed man in his 40s who specialized in elder abuse cases. He'd seen enough of these situations to recognize the signs immediately, and when I showed him the videos on my phone, his expression grew increasingly grim. "This is one of the most calculated cases I've seen," he said after, watching Sarah express relief over Richard's death. "They planned every step of this, including having you declared mentally incompetent. The level of premeditation here is staggering. What can we do about it?" "More than they think?" Detective Thompson smiled grimly, his eyes showing the satisfaction of someone who enjoyed bringing criminals to justice. "Mrs. Chen, your husband gave you something better than evidence. He gave you a time-stamped, legally admissible record of conspiracy to commit fraud. We can arrest them today." 2 hours later, I sat in Detective Thompson's unmarked car, watching as uniformed officers approached my front door. The sight of police badges and official uniforms would have terrified me under normal circumstances, but today they represented justice and the restoration of order to my chaotic world. Sarah answered the door with her usual false confidence, probably expecting to intimidate another elderly neighbor or well-meaning friend who had come to check on me. Her smile was perfectly in place, her posture relaxed and welcoming. Her expression when she saw the police badges was worth every moment of the fear and confusion she'd put me through. The color drained from her face like water from a broken cup, and her carefully composed mask slipped completely. "Sarah Bennett?" Detective Thompson asked, stepping forward with his identification held high. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and unlawful takeover of private property." "This is ridiculous," Sarah sputtered, but her face had gone pale and her hands were shaking. "We have legal residency here. The homeowner invited us. She's not thinking clearly, and we're just trying to help." "The homeowner is standing right there," Detective Thompson pointed to me in the car, "and she never invited you to change her locks and steal her house. We have video evidence of you planning this theft while she was at her husband's funeral." Sarah's mother appeared in the doorway, her walker abandoned in her haste to see what was happening. The supposedly frail woman moved with surprising speed and agility when faced with the prospect of arrest. "You can't arrest us. We have rights. This woman is clearly not competent to make decisions about her own welfare." "You have the right to remain silent," Officer Martinez began, and I watched with deep satisfaction as both women were handcuffed and led to separate patrol cars. Their protests and threats echoed across the neighborhood, drawing curious neighbors to their windows and front yards. The moving truck was impounded as evidence, its contents cataloged and photographed by crime scene technicians. Sarah's belongings were removed from my house by court order, carried out in evidence bags and boxes while photographers documented every item. By evening, I was back in my own home, surrounded by my own memories, sleeping in the bed I'd shared with Richard for 30 years. The house felt different, somehow violated by the intrusion, but also cleansed by the removal of those who had tried to steal it. But the story wasn't over yet. Michael arrived at my house at 8 o'clock that night, his face a mask of confusion and betrayal. Not betrayal by his wife, but betrayal by me. He looked haggard and exhausted, as if he'd aged years in the space of a single day. "Mom, how could you have Sarah arrested? She was trying to help. She was trying to take care of you." I led him to Richard's study and showed him the computer screen, now displaying the full library of surveillance videos. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and devastating in its scope. Michael, I want you to watch something. And I want you to remember that these cameras have been recording for 6 months. I played the video of Sarah expressing relief over Richard's death, her cold words echoing in the quiet room. I showed him the footage of them planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, their casual discussion of my future as if I were property to be disposed of. I let him hear his wife's voice calling me the old woman and discussing how to steal my house while I grieved. With each video, Michael's face grew paler and more stricken. By the time I finished, he was sitting with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with the weight of what he'd learned. I didn't know, he whispered, his voice broken. Mom, I swear I didn't know it was this calculated. I thought she really cared about you. But you went along with it. She said. She told me you had agreed. That you wanted help managing the house. That her mother really was sick and needed care. She showed me medical documents, doctor's reports. I believed her because I wanted to trust my wife. Michael, you're 42 years old. Did you really believe that I would agree to give up my house 3 days after burying your father? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, he looked up, tears streaming down his face. I wanted to believe it because it solved our financial problems. Sarah's been pressuring me about money, about our future. We're drowning in debt, Mom. Credit cards, student loans, the mortgage on our apartment. When she said this was the solution. You chose to believe what was convenient rather than what was right. Yes, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. And I'm so sorry, Mom. I failed you when you needed me most. I let my own desperation blind me to what was really happening. It was the first honest thing he'd said to me in months, perhaps years. But honesty, while necessary, doesn't erase betrayal. The son I'd raised, the boy who had once promised to always protect me when he grew up, had chosen financial convenience over his mother's welfare. Michael, I need you to understand something, I said, sitting down across from him. This wasn't just about money for Sarah. She celebrated your father's death because it made her plan easier. She was grateful that the man who raised you and loved you was gone because he stood in her way. I know, he said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I heard it in the recording. I can't reconcile the woman I married with the person on those videos. It's like she's a complete stranger. She is a stranger, Michael. The woman you thought you married never existed. She was playing a role, and when she thought she could get what she wanted, the mask came off. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the magnitude of the deception that had nearly destroyed our family. Outside, the neighborhood had settled into its evening routine, porch lights coming on and families gathering for dinner. Normal life continuing as if the world hadn't fundamentally shifted. What happens now? Michael finally asked. Now you decide what kind of man you want to be, I replied. Sarah made her choices, and she'll face the consequences of those choices. But you have to decide whether you're going to continue enabling her or if you're going to stand up for what's right. I want to make this right, Mom. I don't know how, but I want to try. It starts with honesty, Michael. Complete honesty. The police will want your testimony about Sarah's behavior, her financial situation, her relationship with her mother. You'll need to tell them everything you know. She'll hate me for it. She already destroyed your marriage when she decided to steal from your mother. The question is whether you're going to help bring her to justice or continue to be her accomplice. The legal proceedings took 3 months, during which the full scope of Sarah's deception became clear. She wasn't just an opportunistic daughter-in-law who had seen a chance to steal a house. She was a career criminal who had been planning this elaborate fraud for years. The investigation revealed that Sarah's mother wasn't her mother at all, but an accomplice she'd met in a previous elderly abuse scheme in another state. They had been working together to identify vulnerable seniors and systematically steal their property through a combination of manipulation, forged documents, and fraudulent medical evaluations. Dr. Rodriguez, the physician who had agreed to declare me mentally incompetent, was also part of the conspiracy. He had been providing false medical opinions in exchange for a percentage of the stolen assets. The authorities found evidence of at least 12 other cases where he had helped Sarah and her accomplice steal from elderly victims. Sarah was ultimately charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted theft, elder abuse, identity fraud, insurance fraud, and racketeering. Her mother was charged as an accessory to all counts. Both were convicted and sentenced to 8 years in prison, plus restitution and restraining orders that prevented them from coming within 500 feet of my property. Dr. Rodriguez lost his medical license and was sentenced to 5 years in prison for his role in the conspiracy. The medical board investigation revealed a pattern of unethical behavior spanning several years and multiple victims. Michael filed for divorce 2 weeks after Sarah's arrest, finally understanding that his marriage had been built on lies from the very beginning. The woman he thought he loved had never existed. She had been a carefully constructed persona designed to gain access to our family's resources. He moved into a small apartment across town and began the slow process of rebuilding his relationship with me. It wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, requires time and consistent action to repair. But Michael was genuinely remorseful, and he worked hard to prove that he had learned from his mistakes. He started coming to dinner every Sunday, helping with household repairs and yard work that Richard used to handle. He never asked for money or brought up his financial problems, instead focusing on rebuilding the bond between us through actions rather than words. But the most important outcome wasn't legal or financial. It was the knowledge that Richard had protected me one final time, that his love had transcended death itself to shield me from those who would harm me. Even facing his own mortality, knowing he wouldn't be there to defend me, he'd found a way to give me the tools I needed to defend myself. The hidden camera system had done more than just record evidence of a crime. It had revealed the true character of people I thought I knew and trusted. It had shown me that Sarah's sweetness had always been calculated, that her concern had always been performance, and that her love had always been conditional on what she could gain. But it had also shown me the depth of Richard's love, his understanding of my character, and his faith in my ability to fight back when the time came. He had known that I would need proof, not just suspicion, to convince authorities and to convince myself that what was happening was real. 6 months after that terrible day when I was locked out of my own house, I stood in my garden, tending to the roses Richard had planted the year before he died. They had bloomed beautifully that spring, as if his love was still nurturing them from beyond the grave. The garden was exactly as he'd left it, a living testament to his care and attention to detail. Mrs. Henderson from next door called over the fence, her voice carrying genuine concern. "Evelyn, how are you doing, dear? I've been worried about you since all that terrible business with Sarah." "I'm doing well," I replied, and for the first time since Richard's death, it was completely true. Better than I've been in months. "I'm so glad to hear that. Richard would be proud of how you handled everything. He always said you were stronger than you looked." The comment made me smile, remembering how Richard used to tease me about my iron will hidden beneath my gentle exterior. He had seen strength in me that I sometimes forgot I possessed, and his faith had proven justified when I needed it most. The house was mine again, truly and completely. The memories were restored to their proper places on the mantelpiece and walls. Richard's photograph smiled down at me from above the fireplace, and sometimes I could swear I felt his presence in the rooms we'd shared for so many years. In Richard's study, the computer still hummed quietly, the surveillance system still active and recording. The cameras had become a permanent part of the house's security system, a reminder that sometimes the greatest act of love is preparing for the battles your loved ones will have to fight alone. Sarah had thought she was so clever, planning her theft while I grieved. She had changed the locks and moved in her family, claiming rights she didn't possess to a life she hadn't built. She had underestimated both Richard's foresight and my determination to fight for what was rightfully mine. But she had forgotten that a house isn't just walls and windows and real estate value. It's the love that fills it, the memories that sanctify it, and the determination of those who refuse to let it be stolen. It's the accumulation of decades of shared experiences, the repository of a lifetime's worth of precious moments that can't be bought or sold or taken by force. Richard's cameras had captured more than just evidence of a crime. They had captured the moment when I learned that even in death, true love finds a way to protect what matters most. They had recorded the voices of those who would harm me, but more importantly, they had preserved the evidence of Richard's continuing care for my welfare. The red light still blinks in Richard's workshop, a silent guardian watching over the home we built together. And sometimes when the evening light falls just right across his desk, when the shadows gather in familiar patterns and the house settles into its nighttime quiet, I swear I can feel him smiling. Michael visits regularly now, having learned the difference between being a husband and being a son, between loyalty to a spouse and loyalty to family. Our relationship is slowly healing, built on honesty and mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. He's dating someone new now, a kind woman named Jennifer who treats me with genuine warmth and respect. The neighborhood has returned to its normal rhythm, though I've noticed that neighbors check on each other more frequently now. Mrs. Henderson stops by twice a week to share tea and gossip. The Patels invite me to their daughter's school events and cultural celebrations. The community that Richard and I had been part of for 30 years has rallied around me, creating a network of support and protection that Sarah never could have overcome. Sarah thought she could steal my house and my life, reducing me to a helpless victim who could be manipulated and discarded. Instead, she gave me something far more valuable: the knowledge that even in my darkest hour, even when I thought I was completely alone and vulnerable, I was never truly defenseless. Richard's love had transcended death itself, reaching across the divide between life and whatever comes after to shield me from harm. His cameras had been more than surveillance equipment. They had been instruments of justice, tools of protection, and proof that love finds a way to endure even when the lover is gone. And that knowledge, my friends, is worth more than all the houses in the world. It's the understanding that we are never truly alone as long as we are loved, that protection can come from the most unexpected sources, and that justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied. If this story touched you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to remember that love finds a way to protect us, even when we think we're facing our battles alone. Subscribe for more stories about the strength we discover in our most difficult moments, and remember, sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the people who love us most are still watching over us, long after we think they're gone. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.